with the title.
You say when.
What was that?
Well, we're live,
Okay.
according to the screen.
Okay.
That was a big truck
Good
tire.
morning. This is the second half of, it's Wednesday, March 23rd, 2022. This is the second half of the morning for Senate Natural Resources and Energy. And we are taking up H175, an act relating to beverage container redemption center system. And our first witness this morning is Peter Blair from CLF. So good morning, Mr. Blair.
Good morning. Can you hear and see me okay?
Yes, we can. So the floor is yours.
All right, wonderful. I'm just going to begin sharing my screen. Can you see my screen now? It's a PowerPoint presentation.
Yes, looks good. Thanks.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to testify today in support of H175. For the record, my name is Peter Blair. I am a staff attorney with Conservation Law Foundation Zero Waste Project, and I'm here to support H175 and its efforts to modernize Vermont's existing bottle bill program. Just to provide you with an overview of where my testimony is going, I'm going to first just provide an overview of the benefits of the bottle bill program, especially when compared to single stream recycling. Then I'll focus on the importance of targeted updates to Vermont's existing and proven effective bottle bill program. And I'll finally end by just cautioning the approach that was proposed by the Beverage Association, which would unnecessarily overhaul the entire system. So when fully optimized, a bottle bill system creates a truly unparalleled type of recycling. This system is a critical tool in the shift towards a more circular economy. And this is because the bottle bill can do things that no other recycling system can. First and foremost, it provides a strong financial incentive for people to actually participate in recycling efforts. Second, it creates a high quality recycled content material that can actually be used for circularity, bottle to bottle recycling. Fourth, it supports more innovative policies, things like recycled content standards and even extended producer responsibility for packaging. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, it creates the infrastructure as well as the culture that we need to shift towards a reusable beverage system. Now, this point has been raised throughout your hearing so far, but one of the most important things a bottle bill does is it really does incentivize people to recycle. Putting that 5-cent deposit on each can and container gives you high redemption rate. It means that cans are actually going to be put back into the system. And this chart shows the 10 US bottle bill states and their redemption rates. And you'll see that even underperforming systems are performing extremely high when compared to the national average for states without bottle bills, which sits at only 27%. An added benefit of this also is that when you place that deposit on each can and container, you are reducing litter, which saves not only corporations money, but also the state of Vermont, because a lot of funds go into litter removal and cleanup services. For the first time in 2020, Keep America Beautiful finally compared litter in states with bottle bills and without. Unsurprisingly, states with bottle bills had significantly less container litter. I think it was about half the container litter in the states without bottle bills. But more importantly, they found that overall litter was less as well. So it really is an effective litter reduction tool. But perhaps more important.
Mr. Blair, a quick question on that last slide. So some bottle bills are more ambitious than others, right? In terms of the number of materials required to be collected. So who on that list would you say has a more comprehensive list of materials to be collected through the bottle bill system? And so that we can see what their redemption rate is. Kind of, you know, make it.
I would point to Maine for one of the most straightforward comparisons to Vermont. They cover pretty much all beverage containers except dairy products. They also only have a 5-cent deposit on most of those containers, and they're still hitting about an 84% redemption rate. Oregon also has a much more expansive system. They have a very high redemption rate. Michigan as well covers almost all products. So those are probably the most exceptional bottle bills when it comes to the US. But places like New York and most recently Connecticut also have slightly expanded their programs to include things like water. So those are really the kind of gold star standards when it comes to the full scope of having containers covered under the program.
So I can pull this question, but I think in the back of our minds is wondering about where we're thinking about going with the bottle bill, with a larger number of materials included, what are the design features of the programs that are highest performing?
For the most part, the design features are very similar to Vermont's existing program, which is why we feel that H175 is a very smart way of approaching expansion. The system clearly is working in Vermont, despite not being modernized in nearly 5 decades. There's still a very respectable redemption rate. Maine's system is very similar to Vermont's. When they expanded, they didn't do a dramatic overhaul. They just focused on expanding the scope. I think the efforts to improve the handling fee for non-commingled containers is going to be very important. That's a key part of H175 because it will make sure that redemption centers are actually being properly compensated for handling not only the increased volume of materials, but especially materials that don't go through that commingling agreement, which would reduce the amount of sorts. Oregon has a slightly different system, but I will note that it's not a full, it's not the stewardship model that I think the approach that the Beverage Association is proposing here in Vermont. They have a lot more oversight and control over the system, and the State Environmental Agency has a lot of checks and balances, and their law was written in a very comprehensive way that makes sure that while the beverage industry has certain privileges in Oregon that they don't have under the Vermont system, there's a lot of checks and balances, which we feel was not included in Ms. Teague's proposal. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that's helpful. Thanks.
Okay, no worries. So not only is it important to get those containers back into the system, but one of the true benefits of the bottle bill is that you're actually going to see circularity recycling. That means bottles are turned back into bottles, cans are turned back into cans. And this information is taken from the Container Recycling Institute, and it shows that there are significantly higher recycling rates for glass, aluminum, and PET in the states with bottle bills when compared to the states without. So you'll see that 77%, 62%, and 64% for states with bottle bills for aluminum, PET, and glass, respectively. This is compared to non-container deposit states, non-bottle bill states, significantly lower, 41%, 13%, and 12%, respectively. And I bring this up because, sorry, was there a question?
Well, yeah, I'm trying to make sure that we're doing the apples to apples thing. The non-deposit containers rate, so these are US rates overall. I'm wondering how applicable they are to Vermont, because for the non-deposit containers in Vermont, we have the single stream model operating in parallel with it. So I don't know if we're seeing higher rates. I would hope so.
That's an excellent question. I know it has been brought up repeatedly that Vermont has a very successful single stream recycling program. Unfortunately, the rate that has been cited, that 67%, is nowhere near accurate. And I'll get to that in a minute, but these numbers are looking at other jurisdictions that primarily depend on single stream recycling. So when you see these lower rates, these are containers that are going through that single stream system. And the problem is that the sorting mechanisms at the MRFs just are imperfect. They cannot properly, first and foremost, take out all of the unrecyclable material that are inadvertently put into the system, and then result in a clean stream of uncontaminated material that can actually be used for recycling efforts. And in Vermont, the 67% rate, as I mentioned, we feel is very flawed. I believe the committee received a memo from Container Recycling Institute earlier this week, which shows that the 67% total container recycling rate that has been used to kind of prop up the single stream recycling program in Vermont is unfortunately false. It's from a 2018 waste characterization study. But first and foremost, that study had some technical issues. When they were calculating the recycling rate, they left out about 10,000 containers that were disposed of. So when you factor that in, the recycling rate drops from 67% down to about 56%. So that's the first problem. Second, it also didn't include the material that we now know was illegally dumped by CSWB. That's about 6,000 tons of glass. So when you factor that into the recycling rate, it drops down a bit further to 47%. And then probably the most concerning part is that when they calculated this overall container recycling rate, they included the material that goes through the bottle bill system. So when you segregate that 47% and focus on how many containers were recycled through the bottle bill program as compared to single stream, you get a much dramatic picture. So about 87% of the containers passed through Vermont's bottle bill program were actually recycled. That's compared to 28% when looking at the single stream. So it really is a market difference. Vermont has a pretty great system, probably the best you can get of single stream. But when it comes to container recycling, the only way to properly do it really is the bottle bill. So does that address your question of the kind of apples to oranges?
Yes, thanks very much for this. Yes.
No worries.
Thanks.
And the importance of making sure that the materials are going through the bottle bill isn't just about the actual recycling rates, but again, you're providing that high quality recycled material. And this is becoming increasingly important as both companies make voluntary pledges, but states also look to mandate recycled content standards, which are really important when we're trying to get to circularity, when we're trying to force companies to actually utilize recycled materials when they're making new beverage cans. So this shows the list of corporate promises where the biggest beverage companies stand in terms of their pledges to meet recycled content requirements. You'll notice that they are significantly lagging behind where they want to be. And a huge factor of this is there's just not enough recycled material for them to actually use because there aren't enough modernized bottle bill systems to produce that clean, steady stream of uncontaminated material. And I'll note with plastic specifically, there is growing concerns that when you put PET through the single stream system, it's always going to be too contaminated, too toxic to be turned into food grade quality material. That's a legal term of art. The US FDA is responsible for regulating what materials can be used for food packaging. And there are significant concerns that even when the single stream system is working and you actually have that properly segmented PET, it's just far too toxic to actually be used circularly to create new bottle to bottle recycling. And then perhaps most importantly though, and I know this question has come up repeatedly, is how do we get to reuse? Recycling is well and good, it's much better than disposal, but the end goal is how do we actually keep materials in circulation so that we're not recycling them, but actually reusing them. And the bottle bill is a critical tool in that. You're creating both the infrastructure and the consumer culture that you need to transition large scale to reuse. And Oregon has been brought up a couple times, but I want to briefly just run through exactly what they did. So they have a voluntary program. In about 2018, they purchased 245,000 refillable bottles. These can be refilled up to 40 times each. They were made from recycled glass. They went out and teamed up with local breweries, wineries, cideries, and had them begin filling their orders with these reusable bottles. Nothing changed for the consumer. They still went, they purchased their beverages, now in a refillable bottle. They paid their 10-cent deposit. They hopefully enjoyed their beverage. They redeemed the container so that it could get their refund. And then the bottle bill system took care of the rest. It segregated it from the recycling stream and made sure that it was actually put into circulation after it was sterilized to be reused and refilled. And the bottle bill system, once you have that culture in place, it really is quite easy to shift towards this reuse model. And Oregon's program has been extremely successful. So these are the benefits of a modernized bottle bill system, the kind of full range of things you can expect to see. And Vermont has seen some of these benefits because the program has been in place for nearly 5 decades. But the problem is we haven't dramatically increased the amount of materials that are going to the system. We haven't addressed the fact that the deposit is no longer a strong enough financial incentive to keep people participating in the system. And we haven't addressed the handling fee to properly pay redemption centers for the services they're providing to the state. And that's where H175 comes in. It's focused on making targeted improvements to a system that already is proven and effective. It's just taking it to the next level. So the first point, which I already briefly touched upon, is expanding the scope of containers. Currently, anywhere from 46 to 48% of the beverage containers sold in Vermont are covered by the program. That's not enough. The beverage market has significantly changed. There's a wide range of materials that are not being covered by the system. And this is a problem because, as I showed, only 28% of all of this other material is actually being recycled in Vermont. And furthermore, it's not being recycled as effectively as it should. We're not achieving that circularity. And I'll note that when you're looking at doing an EPR for packaging program in the future, it's really important to get all the material out of the single stream system that has a proven and effective other way of being recycled. So EPR for packaging is a lot different from other types of EPR systems. You're not focusing on homogeneous materials like lead, paint, batteries, bottles and cans. You're focusing on the full stream of residential packaging waste, and developing a perfect system to handle that wide array of material is going to be challenging. So to the extent you can take out beverage containers, which have their own proven and effective system, you're going to make that job much simpler.
I have a question on that one. So in terms of this committee's worked on, and it's a challenge to construct a well-designed extended producer responsibility program. We have a bill that's oriented to that, but not enough capacity in year 2 of biennium to work on it. So we're delaying some work till next year. But is it worthwhile to help establish the market in for clean PET plastic, for instance, by having a post-consumer waste threshold in new packaging to help create the market for the recycling of that material? And or is that, in your mind, premature to move if it's not part of a larger EPR program?
I think it would make sense to focus on adopting a recycled content standard, something CLF certainly supports, as part of a larger EPR push. I think it'd be a little too complicated to throw that into the bottle bill expansion right now. But the point I was trying to make is that I completely understand how hard it is to develop an EPR for packaging program. It really is different from the other types of EPR systems that have been run by the state. But expanding the bottle bill needs to come first, because then you're getting out a huge volume of recyclables from the curbside system, so that when you have that EPR system and you look towards possibly having recycled content standards, not only for beverage containers, but perhaps for, I know New Jersey's law covers plastic garbage bags, paper bags, a wide array of food containers, you can really focus on fine tuning a system that is trying to deal with a wide variety of materials. So I'll also note that Maine and Oregon, the only states that have EPR for packaging laws on the books in the US, both have expansive bottle bill programs, which they did before considering recycled content standards or an EPR push.
Okay, great. The other question that this slide reminds me of is we heard from Tamra and others about the number of sorts required. So we're looking at basically doubling the amount of volume here. The concern we heard was that these days you have somewhere between 100 and 120 sorts, and that if we went to taking out the full set of containers laid out in the bill, that we might end up having redemption centers end up with 300 to 400 sorts. We're going to be going to a redemption center next week, but meanwhile, do you have any response to that concern, which I'm guessing you heard on the House side as well?
I did, and I heard Ms. Deatley bring it up. The commingling agreement really is the way to address the amount of sorts. And I'll note that Maine and New York specifically, because they have programs very similar to Vermont, they were able to expand. Maine expanded its program in 1990. It now covers virtually all containers sold in the state, as I mentioned before. And their program didn't implode. Their redemption centers didn't go under. They currently have about 370 redemption centers, I believe. Their handling fee is lower than Vermont's. And when it comes to the commingling groups, I expect that a large volume of these new containers will join the existing commingling group. First and foremost, a lot of the beverage brands are controlled by a small monopoly of companies. Coke and Pepsi have a large amount of, sports energy drinks, teas that, they can easily keep under their brand and bring into the existing commingling group. But also the regulations are pretty clear that you can have more than one commingling group. So we could potentially see something in Vermont where there's a water commingling group. I think the regulations only specify you need 30% of the market to form one of these. So that'll significantly reduce the amount of sorts. Plus, if it doesn't, for the brands that choose not to, increasing the handling fee. First, they're the ones leaving the savings on the table by paying that higher cost for not joining, but also that increased volume plus higher handling fee for managing that material will give redemption centers a huge amount of new revenue that they can focus on expanding their existing practice, whether it's more floor space, more labor, or even automation, which I believe Tamra mentioned that the costs have come down in a way that most redemption centers in Vermont could afford automation at this point, and the money they'll get from the expanding the system will certainly help them in that capacity.
Okay. I don't know if it's in your presentation. We often look when we're comparing ourselves to other states at the deposit amount, but you were just mentioning the handling fee, and that's what funds the system, right? That nickel or dime is to motivate the consumer to show back up with the bottle. The handling fees to cover the cost of bringing it back and using it. So, have you analyzed the handling fees for other states as well, so we can have a sense of where we fit in terms of costs for the redemption centers?
It's not in my presentation, but I do have a good idea of the handling fees in other states. I believe Vermont is at the higher end at this point, but what that really means is, as you said, you're just paying your redemption centers a fair market value for their services. That money really is paid by the deposit initiator, the beverage brands, to service the process of sorting these cans and materials and making retailers and redemption centers whole. So I believe Maine is close to Vermont's. The increase to the commingling will put Vermont above it. But while it's concerning that Vermont has not addressed the deposit to keep people interested in redeeming their cans and beverages, it's important that Vermont has kept up an aggressive handling fee to make sure the system actually functions as properly designed.
All right, thank you.
No problem. And that is a good segue to the value of the deposit compared to inflation. I know this has been brought up, so I won't spend too much time on it. My calculations match yours, Chair Bray, which is to say that if it was tied to inflation, the 5 cents in 1972 now would be about 35 cents. We understand that H175 does not address increasing the deposit value, but we would support the amendment proposed by VPIRG, which would include language in the statute, which would have a trigger that automatically increases the deposit from 5 cents to 10 cents should the redemption rate fall below 70% for 2 years. We think this is an important fail-safe that will make sure that when we expand, we're also keeping an eye on the system to make sure we're getting those high redemption rates that we want to see. I'll also note that it's important to have a high redemption rate if you want to switch to reuse. Oregon was able to do it right now in a fully voluntary system, primarily because they have so much buy-in to their system from the consumers. A 90% redemption rate means they felt comfortable purchasing the beverage bottles and having a high amount of a belief that people will actually return those to be refilled. So, and they have a 10-cent deposit. Now, I do want to address why it's important not to dramatically overhaul the program. I am very concerned by the proposal that American Beverage and the Steatley have suggested, which would take Vermont's proven and effective bottle bill program, which really for 5 decades without much tinkering with has proven to be very effective. The proposal that they're coming forward with is very concerning, but not surprising. These companies, Coke, Pepsi, Nestle, they have been fighting tooth and nail against bottle bills for decades. They have essentially created a playbook that has tactics that they use to try to undermine any progress while they still claim that they're supporting recycling efforts. This is despite the evidence that bottle bills are the most proven and effective way to handle the containers and the cans that they produce. Earlier this year, CLF published a report entitled The Big Beverage Playbook for Avoiding Responsibility. In this report, we meticulously outlined decades of examples of instances where these companies have lobbied against bottle bill programs. We felt that it was important to expose the tactics they use so that we can avoid the pitfalls that have derailed legislative progress in the past. I've submitted the report as part of my written testimony. I'd encourage you to look at it, but I want to touch upon 2 specific tactics that we've seen used here in Vermont, and mostly the tactic that has just come up, which is dramatically changing the system, which is completely unnecessary. So the first, I'll just touch upon it, the Vermonters for Recycling incident, the astroturfing, because these companies have become so transparent and everyone associates them with being opposed to bottle bills, they are now looking to dilute their message and make it seem like it's coming from concerned Vermonters and not themselves. This is a very deceptive tactic. They're preying upon the strong sense of community in Vermont to get their message out there, and this was attempted to stop any progress on H175. They also engaged in that deceptive patch call network that really confused both legislators and the general public. But more concerning is the fact that because this didn't work, they have now shifted to what we see as the final tactic. When the direct opposition doesn't work, or even that deceptive astroturfing, they switch towards finally saying they support expansion, they support container deposits, as long as you hand over complete control of the system to them. This is despite the evidence that Vermont's system has been extremely successful and very positive for the state. They claim that this is a product stewardship model and that it is closely aligned to jurisdictions like Oregon or Europe. This is misleading. It doesn't have the core central components of all stewardship models, which is a competitive bidding process for selecting who is controlling the system. They're just proposing that they take over it without any type of competition. It doesn't have any robust accountability of the system by the state environmental agency, which is critical to making sure there's checks and balances. It doesn't have any clear standards that outline how the program will be run and how you measure the success of the program. And those would need to be contained in statute so that the stewardship organization, the beverage companies, can't change them. There's no clear enforcement or penalties for failure to meet minimum requirements, things like a minimum redemption rate or access to services. And there's certainly not meaningful opportunity for public engagement, which is very important because Vermonters are a key part of this system. Instead, it's focusing on giving them control over the unclaimed deposit without any assurances that they would actually invest this money into the system. There's no oversight, meaning that they can continuously work to roll back the system, which they're proposing, I believe, in the written testimony Ms. Deatley submitted, to rethink the handling fee and possibly erode it. In Oregon, there is no handling fee, so redemption centers are covered that way. I would ask you to scrutinize the proposal with those thoughts in mind. But more importantly, I just ask you to ignore it. Vermont's system is working, and Vermont can expand without imploding its bottle bill program. As we talked about, the biggest concern they mentioned is the inefficiencies with sorting. The handling fee addresses that. The commingling agreements address that. Most of this can be handled on a business-to-business basis. They're the ones who are responsible for deciding whether they join or not join commingling groups, which really cuts down on the amount of sorts. Moreover, as I mentioned, Maine, New York, they've expanded and their system did not implode. They have a very similar system to Vermont. They didn't need to go this dramatic overhaul route to see the progress that we want to see. So I just very much want you to be very cautious of that approach. This is what they proposed in Connecticut and actually were able to achieve. And there are glaring loopholes in the program that they have now set up in Connecticut in terms of the expansion. But thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any additional questions you have.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Blair? Senator McDonald.
Did I understand that Oregon had standardized containers for a variety of beverages that sellers had to follow? What did Oregon do that was somewhat unusual about having standard beverage container sizes?
I don't think I addressed that. I don't believe they have standard beverage sizes. The point I was trying to make about Oregon is American Beverage is claiming that the proposal, the stewardship model that they have, is similar to the Oregon model, which is a producer responsibility run system. It's different than Vermont's, which is controlled by the state, by DEC and ANR. But Oregon's system is different because it actually has the checks and balances you need to have a fully functioning PRO and stewardship system. The proposal that I've seen written out in Ms. Deatley's testimony doesn't have the core components of the Oregon model, is the point I was trying to address.
Thank you. Did I misunderstood that?
Does Oregon have refillable bottles as part of their system?
They do. And it's been extremely successful. And the reason they've mostly been able to do that is just the high redemption rate that they have. That 90%, that was what justified the purchasing of the refillable beverages, because they felt that there's enough confidence that they will actually be returned and you can actually then take them, sterilize them, and put them back into the system, that they weren't just going to be tossed away. And that is an entirely voluntary program. In places like Europe, Germany has a very, very robust refill system, and that's through actual requirements in their law.
Okay. And the Oregon refill part of their program, so they have a variety of sizes of bottles or something like that, and that they're used by more than one industry. And were you saying that breweries use them? I don't know if dairies use them, but who's using this refillable bottle stream?
Right now, it's limited to the breweries, wineries, and cideries, I believe. They have not expanded it to include other types of soft drinks or the dairy industry. I believe there's discussion about that. And from my understanding, because they've built the consumer culture and started to have the reuse integrated, it would be easier to expand that further to cover more beverages. So they're taking it one step at a time.
Okay, thanks very much. All right, with that, I'd like to go to our next guest, and that is Ms. Segrist.
Good morning.
Good morning. Long time no see.
It's very nice to see you all. I'm sorry that we aren't there in person, but welcome back. So for the record, my name is Erin Segrist. I am president of Vermont Retail and Grocers Association. VRGA, we represent over 750 members across the state. That membership is inclusive of a variety of business types and models, including general retail, grocery stores, convenience stores, redemption centers, distributors, food producers, and business service members. So, a little bit of everybody. So just under 500 of the 750 members that we have are food related members, food retail related members. And of those members, about just under 10% of those members are redemption centers. Of the nearly 50% that the bottle bill may pertain to, we did send a survey out to the membership in order to understand what their position was on expansion, what the experiences they have had over the past few years have been. Those responses included 76% opposed expansion at this time. 97% of respondents agree that the mechanism that the beverage redemption system needs to be fixed or reviewed systematically. And 95% of those respondents reported that the third-party processor continues to fail and pick up containers on a regular basis, which overwhelms the redemption space, withholds the pertinent resources from retailers and redemption centers, and needs to be addressed.
Ms. Segrist,
Yes.
since I wasn't able to write fast enough, are you submitting written testimony so those numbers will be in there?
I'm happy to. Yes, Senator.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. So as we all know, retail has changed immensely since the inception of Vermont's bottle bills. Consumers are purchasing their products from out-of-state retailers, online retailers, remote sellers that deliver directly to their door. New products are introduced on a weekly basis. But unfortunately, retailers are in the middle of the whole bottle bill system and are required to redeem all of those products if they are selling them or selling similar products. We believe that expanding the scope of the bottle bill will overwhelm the redemption infrastructure in Vermont, especially for retailers. I should clarify, we have retailers and we have redemption centers. We have redemption centers that are supportive of expansion. We have redemption centers that are not supportive of expansion. So you'll hear at the end of my testimony that we strongly believe that this committee should hear from redemption centers of all sizes in order to best understand the impact to their business. So again, consumers are purchasing products from multiple types of retailers, and this is impacting Vermont's retailers that have limited space to manage existing sorts. Retailers continue to also face the worst staffing shortages in this last decade, and expanding the bottle bill, especially today, would essentially mandate more human power to collect and sort containers, and that will slow customer service and reduce the convenience factor for customers. Much like retail has changed, consumer demand continues to change too. Consumers demand convenience, and therefore we understand the committee's situation in trying to find the best path forward. But we do believe that the existing system needs significant review before expanding the scope of the bottle bill. Again, reform is essential, with more than half of the containers that would be added by expansion falling into the brand category, hundreds of new sorts, as the previous witness had highlighted, would be added as well. And without addressing the structure of the system, we believe that the system within Vermont will collapse. The previous witness pointed out that I believe Maine has over 300 redemption centers. Vermont does not have that number. We have just over 50 redemption centers. So I don't think we can compare Maine and Vermont, or, we need to make sure that the systems are very similar. Vermont system is not similar to Maine system when it comes to size. VRGA members have shared that they're already struggling with keeping up with recycling. Again, due to several different factors, whether it is staffing shortages or other. I'm sorry.
Sorry, we have a question from Senator Campion.
Yes.
Hi, Ms. Eagles. Good to see you. Thank you. Just a quick question. As we're thinking about, expanding, and you're bringing up the point around, it's a hard thing to do, and I understand that. Are there ways for us to be thinking about this that would help provide folks that you represent some kind of economic support to help, move this along a little bit faster? Does that make sense? Because, and I don't know what the answer to the question is, but I know that we're hearing issues of space. We're hearing, issues about, I would say, not enough recycle container, all that kind of thing. Are there ways for us to partner a little bit in terms of making some dollars available to mostly what you represent, I think entirely very small businesses?
That's a great question.
Have you thought about that at all?
So that's a great question. I know that in the past, I think it was prior to my joining the association, there had been conversations about providing funds to redemption centers that maybe would redesign their business model. I'm not sure that is the way to go. As far as what I personally have not thought about that, but that's certainly something that we as an organization could bring our members together and have that conversation, and we'd be happy to come in and talk with the committee about that.
And the other way I guess I'm thinking about it is, if we have 50 redemption centers, Maine has 300, we're about maybe a third of the size of Maine. How do we get 50 more redemption centers if that's what we need? But okay, thank you for that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's certainly something that we would love to talk with the committee about what that opportunity looks like. I will share with you, and I was almost there. As an impact to retailers and the small redemption centers, I can share with you. I guess I did share with you, 95% of those who responded to the survey shared that the third-party pickup company, the processor, continues to fail in picking up the containers on a regular basis. And that that withholds resources of those retailers to effectively run their business. So I think that's a perfect example of where if we want 50 more redemption centers, we need to ensure that the entire system can manage. And if we have a third-party processor that can't manage the existing system, how can we add 50 more stores or 50 more redemption centers? So that would be an initial question. But thank you, Senator. I appreciate that thoughtful question for sure. So you have all heard my testimony in the past. We are short-staffed. We have several small redemption centers that have very limited space. We have retailers that are retailers and not redemption centers. They have significantly less space than redemption centers, and they are required to take back beverage containers. I think that there is a long conversation that we should be having moving forward in order to address all of these issues. And we look forward to bringing in retailers, more redemption centers, and all stakeholders in order to address the existing system. Again, at this time, we cannot support expansion because the existing system, I'm hearing it from the people on the ground, is not working for them. So I would encourage the committee to consider all options, whether it's the creation of a nonprofit product stewardship organization or working with the retailers and the redemption centers, again, of all sizes and all locations around the state to identify efficiencies within the system. I'll stop there. I'm happy to take additional questions.
Sure. So one question that's come up in committee is, can you help the committee understand the distinction between redemption centers and retailers, including whether or not there is such a thing as a redemption center that does not also sell beverages?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a redemption center, you'll hear from a couple of redemption centers, I believe, after my testimony. But my understanding is, and again, not all redemption centers are members of the RGA, but my understanding is that a majority of the redemption centers do sell beverages and probably some food items. Then you have a retailer, or you have a grocery store. It could be a large grocery store. It could be a small grocery store. It could be, I'm sure you all know of Huron's Market in Wavesfield. He's testified on the bottle bill in the past. He is a retailer. He's a small grocery store, but he is required to redeem beverage containers, I should say. If you buy a beverage from a retailer, that retailer is still required to take back those containers. So as a retailer, it has become incumbent upon them to become a redemption center. But that is not their leading business proposition, right? Their leading business proposition is to sell food and goods. But as a requirement, the state has stipulated that they need to take back those containers. There are retailers that have petitioned the department in order to be exempt from taking back beverage containers. I would also propose an opportunity to talk with you further. I believe you'll be hearing about an amendment from Representative Marcotte later this week about allowing retailers to be completely exempt, which would eventually send additional containers to the redemption centers. That certainly would alleviate some of the stress on a retailer. That was a very long explanation on the difference between the two, but hopefully that was helpful.
I think under current law, if a store is within our redemption center guests who are coming up probably know this, but I think it's if you're within 5 miles of a redemption center or an alternative place to redeem bottles, that a retailer can be exempted from the requirement. I know this happened in Huntington For instance, they said, well, we're right next to Richmond, which has a large facility.
Right. Yes. And that is part of the law. That is part of the requirement. But there are several retailers outside of that 5 mile radius that that continue to be overwhelmed with the requirement to redeem. Again, some of these retailers are very small. They don't have the redemption space, and therefore it requires additional work outside of the retail location in order to redeem those beverages and then eventually bring them back to a redemption center. So those retailers are acting as a middleman, whereas consumers who purchase the products could just go from their home to the redemption center instead of going through a middleman and adding additional hands managing those containers.
Well, right, you were pointing out that one of the concerns is convenience. The consumers always want convenience. So I think that's the same pressure coming back on the store, where they don't want necessarily to go to the next town where the redemption center is. They'd rather just go where they bought the beverage. So we'll have to keep taking more testimony, learning more about the nuances of all this. Any committee questions before we go to our next one? Senator McDowell.
Would the people that you represent support changes to the law that says they don't have to take the bottles back and cans back?
Are you talking about the retailers, Senator? I'm sorry.
People who sell beverages in cans and bottles that are subject to the deposit, if they were told they didn't have to take them back, would you support that?
That is a question I would like to take to my members. Yes.
You've been representing these hundreds of members and you haven't asked them that question?
Well, I mean, essentially, Senator, yes, they would like to not have to take back the bottles. But, I think it's a more complex question.
No, it's
because
not.
there's still.
Question. The question is, would you support a change in the law which says you can sell bottles that have deposits on them, but you don't have to take them back?
Well, that also disrupts the system, right?
If that were a change in the law, would you support that?
I will tentatively say yes, Senator.
Thank you. In Maine, do the people who operate beverage centers, do those centers not sell containers and bottles and cans?
I'm not sure how the Maine system works.
So when we're comparing Vermont redemption centers to Maine redemption centers, it could be that Maine redemption centers operate on a completely different set of rules, such as they don't sell things, they simply redeem them. Is that possible?
Again, I don't know the Maine system. It's possible, but I'm not sure.
Okay, so you compared the Vermont redemption centers to the Maine centers.
I
how
have
many
not.
there were?
No, I'm sorry. I have not compared the two. I simply was commenting on the size and scope, the size of the number of redemption centers in Maine compared to the number of redemption centers in Vermont.
Okay. And thank you. And the rules for redemption centers in Maine, Mr. Chair, I believe, don't require them to sell anything. They can simply redeem, and that's all. If they're free to only accept and redeem products.
Well, maybe our next witnesses will know more about this. All right, are there any other questions for Ms. Segrist? Right. Well, thank you again for coming in. And with that, we'll go to Mr. Langis of the Putney Road Redemption Center. Good,
Hello, everyone.
good morning. Thank
Hear
you
me
for,
okay?
thanks for joining us this morning. So we're in the thick of it on the bottle bill, and we'd love to hear from someone who's in the thick of it in the real world of getting all these bottles.
Well, that is definitely me. I'm 100% real world, so I appreciate you.
That's what we like.
I'm just going to share my screen here. I do have a few slides to go along with my testimony here.
Let me make them come up.
Okay, we're setting you up here in a moment.
Okay.
We'll be good to go.
Just take the share screen there.
Okay, can you see my head slide there?
That looks great.
Terrific. All right. Thanks again for having me here. I appreciate the opportunity to join you virtually, at least, to share my experience with you of the Vermont Bottle Bill and our container redemption system here in Vermont, and to advocate for their expansion in your House Bill 175. My name is John Langis. I live in Norwich. I'm a recently retired member of the Norwich Select Board. I'm also Vice President and General Counsel of a national solar developer called New Energy Equity. And I'm the owner of Wisdom and Power, a Vermont energy and climate consulting firm. But most relevant to you today, I am one of 3 owners of the Putney Road Redemption Center in Brattleboro. Putney Road has operated for over 30 years and has been owned by my partners and me for 5 years now. This is a picture here. This is a picture of our crew down in Brattleboro, in front of our shop there. We like to use the barbecue there to do burgers and hot dogs one Saturday a month for our customers down there. So if you're in town, stop by sometime. I want to start, first of all, to just sort of, do a refresher of how our system works here in Vermont. And I would emphasize the previous gentleman from Conservation Law Foundation who said this really is a good system that works well and has worked well for a long time. The bottle bill mandates that beverage companies, as the producers of the disposable containers, collect the 5-cent deposit on disposable containers for carbonated beverages sold in Vermont. The deposit then provides an incentive for the consumer to return that container to the manufacturer so that they can properly dispose of it. The deposit is first charged by the manufacturers when the beverage is sold to retailers. The deposit is then collected from consumers by those retailers who sell the containers in Vermont. Consumers pay the 5% deposit when they buy the beverages in Vermont, and then they can get that deposit back by redeeming the empty container either where they purchased it or at a certified redemption center. The big difference is that a retail outlet, like Ms. Segrist explained earlier, is only required to redeem brands that it sells itself. A redemption center, however, we must redeem any container presented to us that bears the Vermont 5-cent label, stamp on its label. Then once these are collected, those redeemed containers are picked back up either by the distributors, in the case of retail outlets, or by TOMRA, in the case of redemption center. We're then paid the 5-cent deposit, which we've handed over to the customer already. And then we also get a 3.5-cent handling fee, or 4 cents in the case of sorted brands. And that's intended to be compensation for having to collect, sort, and package for recollection all of these containers. Finally, all the deposits that are not paid back through this redemption process to consumers, those are then handed on to the state in recognition of the burden that unredeemed containers have on the solid waste disposal system in the state of Vermont. Those unredeemed deposits are commonly referred to as the escheats. The bottle bill is not a sexy piece of legislation. It doesn't generate headlines. It doesn't drive political careers like the expansion of broadband, the increase in minimum wage, the repair or recovery of Lake Champlain. Our industry is not a sexy industry either. It's dirty. It's sometimes smelly, physical work. We make our living 3.5 cents at a time. The handling fee that is added to the deposit when our redeemed containers are bought by TOMRA on behalf of the container manufacturer. But we do make a difference. in the lives of our employees, the lives of our customers, the environment of Vermont and beyond, quietly working largely out of sight. The bottle bill is the most successful piece of environmental legislation in Vermont, and its success is driven by the workers who redeemed those containers. If you want to celebrate and reward success, if you want to add momentum to the one area we are winning a critical battle for sustainability during this climate emergency that you all have declared, I urge you to vote to expand the bottle bill and make the necessary once per generation increase in the container handling. Now, some people will say, sure, it's been a success, but why mess with success? If it ain't broke, why fix it? But in business, and hopefully also in government, we have another adage that says that if something works, you should do more of that. That we should focus our energy on what we have proven works and is effective and do more of it. Beyond that, despite a dramatic increase in the amount of recyclable material being placed by Vermonters in their recycling bills over the last decade, we have seen a reduction, a significant reduction in the amount of material that actually gets recycled. In some communities in Vermont, redeemed containers are basically the only stream of material that is actually being recycled now. The most prominent recent example of this, but not a rare one, was the discovery last year that Chittenden Solid Waste District has been dumping recyclable glass for several years in landfill. How does this happen? Well, it's well documented and undisputed that the widespread adoption of single stream recycling has decimated recycling in the United States generally and in Vermont specifically. There's talk in the last testimony and other testimony we've heard about how the expansion of the bottle bill would result in too many redeemed containers to handle. That would be a great problem to have. Triple the amount of containers being recycled in Vermont. That should be where we're going. We see no problem with it. It's important to keep in mind, with the last testimony fresh in our memories, that retail operations have definitely been coerced into the system, right? And that is generally bad policy. We would agree with that as well. We do this because we want to do this. They do it because they have to do it. And I appreciated the question from the senator about what if we changed that part of the rule? But under the current rule, that again works quite well, they're actually only required to redeem the container. They have to give you your 5 cents. They don't have to sort it. They can just have one container of it all mixed up together, still smelly, still dirty, hand over your 5 cents, and then have one of us take the redeemed containers and take the handling fee for sorting it for you. That would work right now, the way the bill is set up. And you could certainly tweak around the edges of the legislation to make that more explicit if you thought that was helpful. But no one's being forced to do that hard labor of the separation. And it is tricky, it's hard, but at the same time, it's a little bit insulting for a beverage manufacturer to tell you that, gosh, having to think of 100 extra things in your job is really just too much to ask of people. Think of all of the things that you keep straight in your mind with whatever your job is, whatever your career is, that you just naturally have had to organize over your life and building that expertise. Our team in Brattleboro, it's amazing watching them do this sorting. They keep all of these things straight. They could do more of that. They've all told us, yeah, we could add more sorts, we could add more brands. When you compare it to like the sort of categories that an accountant has to remember when they're doing people's taxes and accounting every day, it's a lot more than 400 items, I guarantee you. Single stream recycling was a well-meaning attempt to both streamline the collection side of recycling while making recycling easier for individuals. One container, all your recyclables, sounded terrific. Unfortunately, it proved to be too easy. People regularly place unrecyclable materials mixed in with the recyclable, with the result that the entire stream becomes contaminated and the effort required to re-separate those materials far outweighs the economic value of the resulting stream. So recycling companies understandably choose not to do that. The recycling stream has become just another garbage stream for a world that is broadly and systemically being poisoned by plastic waste. Redemption centers, on the other hand, create the least contaminated stream of recyclables in Vermont. These materials are separated by type, glass, plastic, aluminum, by size with over 15 different categories. And in some cases, they're sorted by brand. In any case, single stream has failed as a policy experience, utterly and completely. I urge you to fix that legislation as well, but in the meantime, please don't abandon the system that has worked well in Vermont for over 50 years and is broadly supported by a huge majority of Vermonters. So what is our impact really? We humble redeemers with our bags of nickels. Most of us, we measure the bottle bill from the perspective of our kitchens, our garages, where a bag of cans and bottles sits for a week or two and is redeemed occasionally when it gets full. Feels good. You get a few bucks in your pocket. What impact can that really be having in a world that is being crushed by the weight of environmental devastation? Is it really worth it? We think so. Putney Road Redemption Center is the largest independent among the redemption centers. We redeem about 10 million containers per year. I think our other guest here, Jacob Trombley and his wife Kim, I think they redeem more containers than us total across their several shops by now. But we estimate that we're about 6% of the market just with our shopping bag. So what do we achieve with those 10 million nickels? Well, we have a team of 4 to 6 employees, depending on the time of the year. We have a manager who's been with Putney Road for nearly 10 years already. We have 3 other team members who have been with us for over 5 years. No employee has a college degree. Every employee is a lifelong Vermonter. Our payroll supports them and their families. We also provide $500,000 a year to our customers. That money goes to individuals to help them make ends meet. It also supports dozens of schools, churches, service organizations, sports teams, and charitable organizations in and around Brattleboro. A partnership with the Wyndham Solid Waste generates charitable donations by allowing customers at the transfer station the option to redeem their containers rather than placing them into the recycling bin. That saves money for the waste district, and it also helps fund local charities. By removing those containers from the waste stream, we save local transfer stations and solid waste districts the cost of handling over 30 tons of glass a year. And beyond Putney, the bottle bill statewide also helps keep Vermont's roadways clean of litter, with an incentive for people to pick up containers they see thrown on the side of the road. In 2020, we provided about $3 million in a speech to the state of Vermont, which are being used to help clean up Lake Champlain. Maybe redemption is sexy after that. Not too bad for a pile of nickels, really. I'm going to skip over the details of the bill because you've heard other very detailed testimony on that, and you're well aware of what this does. We would, though, also support the testimony that would increase the deposit fee from 5 to 10% that VPERD has proposed. We think that that's smart and makes sense, and goes a little ways in keeping the value of that deposit really as a good incentive. See, that's that, because I'm skipping over the details of the bill here to save us some time for questions if you have them. I hope I've given you a useful picture of how the bottle bill works in the real world, how it affects real Vermonters, how it affects our environment, what's been a greater success than we ever hoped it would be in 1972 when it was put into place, how these little nickels can make a very big difference. I hope you vote on the bill, and I'd be happy to talk to you about it.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the quick question I have is, the pushback has been concerns about smaller. Well, one quick question, so we get this part straight. You're a redemption center and you do not sell any beverages, is that correct?
Correct. We're purely a redemption center and a U-Haul, but as far as this industry goes, we're just
Yeah. Okay. And so this may be more a concern expressed by retailers who are currently redeeming. But the notion of going from roughly 100 stores to something like 300 or 400, I don't know if you find that an accurate estimate of what the impact would be, and even in your own facility designed for this, how problematic would it be to have double or triple the number of sorts to deal with.
Sure. Yeah, I do think the number has been significantly exaggerated for the reasons that we heard from earlier from I think Paul. What's his name?
Can't
From
hear.
Conservation
Yeah,
Law.
it's not hard. I don't know if you can lean to the mic a little more. We're having some trouble hearing you.
Sorry. Is that better?
That is better, thanks.
Okay. I do think the number of the increase is exaggerated, as was pointed out in the initial testimony we heard today. I think that there will be a lot of commingled that will come along, just like there is now. All of the big beverage manufacturers also do wine, they also do sports drinks. But definitely for a small, we live in Vermont. Right? I think of Dana Witt's in Norwich, and actually Dana Witt's is kind of large for a small Vermont country store. There's not too many folks working there. I get that for sure. And they don't have a ton of extra space for extra bins. And that's why I made the point at the beginning that they have to redeem the containers because that's the point of sale, but they don't have to flip them. They could simply choose to just not and just pay the nickel and then have the independent redemption centers, the folks that want to do this, collect those from them, and then they would get that handling fee. The retailer wouldn't get the handling fee anymore. But you may also find that by increasing the handling fee a little bit, that it is worth it for those retailers, and they decide to pay back to keep doing it.
Sure. Okay, thank you for that. Senator McDonald?
If the deposit went to 20 cents or 10 cents, would that negatively affect your business?
No, we're in favor of increasing the deposit. We were in favor of having it go up to 10 cents back in the original House bill. 5 cents was much more meaningful in 1972 when the bottle bill was passed. It really was meant to be an incentive for if you're driving down the road and you see someone who's throwing a tin can out their window, stop and pick it up for them, and to keep that incentive there. So we support the full move to 10 cents, but as a fallback, we would at least like to see the proposal made by you folks.
Last quick question. I don't know how you would know this or how you can respond to it, but so there you are on the coast of the New Hampshire border. Whenever we talk about the bottle bill, there's concern about fraud. If a nickel becomes a dime, which I think we've seen other data that suggests that has a clear impact on people's interest in getting their deposit back. But how about do we become more attractive as a place for fraudulent redemption? And what's your take on that one?
We do, for sure, right? It's an incentive, so you can't argue with a straight face that the incentive only works on one side of the border. I think that everybody recognizes that there's some cross-border traffic. I think the examples that typically have been brought up in the testimony are disingenuous. They talk about states where there's a very different situation. Michigan is bordered by several states, none of whom have bottle bills. Iowa is bordered by, I think, 6 different states. None of them have bottle bills. So yes, we have the New Hampshire border, runs down the entire length of the state. On our other borders, though, we have bottle bill states. So it is from that one direction. The way that I think about it is I look around at my transfer station in Norwich, and I go to the transfer station. Most people, right, they're recycling, and there's a lot of redemption stuff in the recycling stream. So it's difficult to motivate people to do it who have paid the 5 cents. Right? I don't think that there's a ton of people that are running around just for the added benefit of having not paid the 10 cents on the other side of the border. It's kind of difficult stuff to do, and so that's why not as many people do it as we'd like to see. But the single most important point on the fraud is, again, to go back to not letting the beverage manufacturers blame a victim of a problem. So they were given the opportunity, they were actually given the instruction in the original bottle bill, don't sell Vermont stamped containers outside of Vermont. And they said, well, that's kind of a hassle. We're just going to do that anyway. So they sell Vermont stamp containers all over the country, right? Not only in New Hampshire, but online, right? Every Walmart in the country, like they're all over the place. And they chose to do that for a business reason, right? They chose, again, to put that cost onto you and your system. So the fact that that creates a little bit of arbitrage across the border is not ideal. And it definitely has a bit of a transfer effect from Vermonters who are paying their dental to New Hampshire who haven't paid it. But the problem is created by the same people who created the whole problem at the beginning of everything. Don't let them come and cry crocodile tears about how unfair this is that people in New Hampshire can bring a bottle like that.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I'm mindful of the clock and I'd like to go on to Mr. Trombley. So thanks again, Mr. Langis.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Who's committing the fraud here?
Yeah. Well, it's a powerful.
Why is your video not working?
She doesn't speak much louder.
Is
They're there, they're just not picturing.
okay. Well,
Hi
we
there,
see.
can you hear us?
Yes, we can. That's great. Thanks.
Perfect. Sorry, my computer actually broke yesterday, so we're using a different one, and apparently the video does not work, so I apologize.
No problem.
So my name's Kim Trombley. My husband Jacob is also here. We own Vermont Redemption, and we thank you for letting us come here to testify on behalf of Bill H175.
And Ms. Trombley, where's your redemption center located, please?
Yep. So we own, we have 5 different locations. We have Springfield Redemption, Hartford Redemption, Virgins Redemption, Heinsberg Redemption, and Valley Redemption, which is in Bradford. So our 5 locations are kind of spread out throughout the state, 3 of which are on the New Hampshire border. So I'm sure we'll get to that. And then 2 of which, one, Virgins is in Addison County, so central, and then Heinsberg just a tad north and over.
Okay.
So
And one other quick question, sorry.
no, it's okay.
Are you redemption centers only, or do you also sell beverages?
So we currently are only redemption center. We do not have retail at all.
Okay, thank you.
We have experience with being retail as well previously. We used to have a convenience store with the Redemption Center, which is where my father in the 80s had started Virgin's Redemption. We took it over and we had retail with Redemption. So we know both sides of it.
Great, thanks.
So we are
What
in,
would you like to tell us?
can you hear me?
Yes, thanks.
So we are in support of H175. The increase in the handling fee, for obvious reasons, will help offset all costs. Minimum wage is going up. We don't pay anyone minimum wage currently because we have had our employees for quite some time. But when minimum wage increases, our wages that we pay our current employees increases as well. So that would be a nice way to offset that. An increase in volume, we are always looking for an increase in volume, whether that is an increase in the containers that are currently in the bottle bill, where we're actively pursuing transfer stations around the state. For example, we've approached Addison County solid waste. They're not interested, but we're always trying to increase our volume, because when we increase our volume, we increase the amount of revenue that's coming in. So bringing in additional containers would definitely help us. That when we are saying that we want to increase our volume, what is really important to kind of look at is that, say we have our 5 different locations. At each location, we could have a number of different a different number of employees there, depending on the volume. What's important and what maximizes the amount of money that we can come in and then can pay to our employees would be to max out each employee and the space that we have for those individual locations. For example, in Springfield, we have 3 full-time employees during the winter time, and it's roughly 2,000 square feet. It's a little bit more. So what would maximize the profit to then pass on to our employees would be to obviously fill that building every single day and get picked up by Tomra every single day, and have our employees who we have working there counting as many containers as they possibly can within the hours that they're working. We try to do that at all of our locations, and there is significantly more ability to add containers. So adding the Powerade, the sports drinks, the wine, the cider, anything that you can think of to add, we would be able to take in. So those are kind of the things that are in the revised bill. I will touch on the 10 cent because I think that it might be brought up. So we don't necessarily have a hard position on that. I'm in favor of it. And the only con that I really see with the 10 cent would be one with the fraud that you're talking about with the state, because unfortunately the manufacturers, distributors do have containers being sold in New Hampshire that have stamps on them that have that Vermont deposit stamp. And then also just having additional money in the redemption center just increases the ability, there's more money for someone to steal. Is sometimes, but that's what safes are for. And then what I'd also like to touch on is I know that New Hampshire is looking into a bottle bill. I know that they bring it up periodically, but I have heard that there is some strong traction there. So that would be, if they joined in the group there, we wouldn't have this issue, and it would be, a lot easier to deal with. I would also like to mention just a couple clarifying points from testimony that I've read and heard. I haven't had a chance to hear all of it, but the increasing the number of sorts to like 400, I think is a little inflated. We've spoke to redemption centers over in Maine and New York, which I know that there are different systems there. However, a lot of these containers that we are looking to add here are going to be able to go into the commingle system, probably, maybe not immediately, but pretty quickly, and they can form their own commingling group within the bounds of what the regulations are. So I definitely don't see us having to sort 400 sorts. We currently only have about 100 at each of our locations. And yeah, some of them aren't even 100. And we spoke to someone, a redemption center just outside of Augusta, Maine, today, who they have just over 100 sorts. So I don't see this being a problem. When it was added to those 2 states, there was not this huge overhaul and the system completely collapsed. That's just not going to happen.
Do you, Ms. Trombley, do you have a sense of how many sorts Maine or New York ended up with that was manageable for them?
So the redemption centers that we've spoken to, I know over in New York, it's definitely less than 200.
They have a lot of different distributors in New York from what I know of, and those distributors, everything has to be separated by those distributors. So you could have, I don't know, Budweiser, Anheuser-Busch could sell Bud Light, and another distributor could sell Budweiser, but they're the same company. But you have to sort them separately. Over here in Vermont, that's all commingled.
So again, the systems are a little different. We don't have maybe some of the complication that New York does. But again, looking over at Maine, like I said, that one redemption center just outside of Augusta, a larger place, which would be able to probably take a larger number of sorts because they would be redeemed. So the reason not every redemption center in Vermont has the same number of sorts, right, is because of the on the retail side, it's just not sold in that area. So for example, there's only a Trader Joe's up in Burlington. So down in, Springfield, we don't get any Trader Joe's because there's no Trader Joe's. So you don't have that sort. So that's why the number of sorts kind of varies a little bit. But right outside, the larger areas are generally where you have the largest number of sorts. And, that one redemption center right outside of Augusta, Maine, they said they only had just over 100 sorts. So is that answering your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yep. So, and just to kind of touch on some other just things that I don't necessarily agree with other testimony that might be brought up here that I could kind of touch on is, I don't know why a business would close because they are doing better. I don't know. I don't really understand that. I might be missing something there. But for example, if I am a small redemption center, so I'll take one of our locations, one of our smallest ones, Heinsberg, for example. Not only is it smallest in terms of the number of containers that we redeem, it's also our smallest in terms of size. So I definitely don't see it being an issue for Heinsberg. We can handle it. The front space that we have, and anybody is welcome to come down and take a look. We can do some tours if you'd like. And the front space that we have smart people that work, with us. We don't even have bins out front that are for commingling. There's no bin whatsoever because it is sorted as it is being counted. It's just the way the process works. There are efficiencies to be found everywhere. And
You put a bin up for an outlier, something you don't get a lot of.
yeah,
You don't put a bin up for something that you get 12-ounce Coca-Cola every day. You put 240 of them in a bag. You fill a barrel and you dump it into the bag, and then that's 240. You don't need to add another step of putting it into the bin. So you're not going to have 300 to 400. And most people drink a lot of the same products, and it's commingled, and you just need more hands. And right now you can't hire those hands because we don't have a competitive anything. We can't compete with these other businesses. I mean, McDonald's, $18 an hour to work. We can't do that. Not based on a 50-year-old program that hasn't seen any increase in revenue. I mean, I want to keep my good employees. I cannot keep them because there's no opportunity. And that really stinks. And what we want to expand our scope of collecting and redeeming and recycling. And it's been made very hard because of the limitations of this program. It has not been expanded and it has not adapted to where it just hasn't. And it's extremely frustrating when you have only redemption centers that redeem cans and bottles like us. That is our business model. And I understand these places that are convenience stores that do not want to take back bottles and cans because that's not their business model. And obviously, if they're not making any money on that, they're not going to allocate much space to it, and they're not really going to care about it. And I understand that. I pick up a 7-Eleven in West Dover, and they strictly take back the 5-cent nickel because they have to, because there's no redemption around. I go and pick them up. I have a box truck, and I bring it back to my location, and I pay them the 5 cents that they pay to the customer. And they love it. They don't have to hire an employee to do that. They just have the regular employee, but they take the word of the customer. I have 100 cans in this bag. I'll take the money, and they pay them that money, and then they give me the product, I count it. But the thing is the customer over time will add teas to that. They'll add water bottles to that. So now the 7-Eleven is paying for stuff that's not in the bottle bill, and then they give it to me. I sort it, and I don't pay them for that. And they're paying out more money than than they should be paying out, but they're not. You see what I could go on, but.
So one quick question, and then we need to wrap because we've hit noon. How often, if you work with a small store, I'm just wondering about the possibility of more small retailers who say, I don't really want to be in this business, partnering with a redemption center. So if like, and it sounds like that's what you're talking about with the Wilmington example. Do you charge them to pick up? Do they pay you to pick up? How does that work?
So West Dover, for example, the one that he was just talking about, will only pay for gas.
Okay, all right. And so it works for you because you're making the 3.5 cents on what you handle.
Yes.
It's just more volume for your center. Okay, great. So last question to Senator McCormick.
Thanks. As a teacher, I always told my students, there's no such thing as a stupid question. I'm about to prove that that's not true. How do you make your money? You pay the deposit to the people giving you the bottle. And you sell the bottle, but all you're getting for that is that same deposit. How do you make your money?
We make it over
Your handling fee.
Who pays the handling fee?
It's built into the price of the product sold.
It's, what is it, 3.5?
3.5 cents for commingle
Or-
and 4 cents for anything else outside of the commingle system.
Yes, so the
that's all-
increase in volume is exactly how we make our money. So the more handling fees that we have coming in, the more money we have coming in, is the way to look at it.
Who pays the handling fee?
The manufacturer, distributors, yeah, it's like the producer is responsible for making sure that that's paid.
All right, thank you.
Great, well,
Takes a
thanks
lot
so
of
much
bottles.
for your, actually, we've met at Virginia.